Good evening. Today is November 19th, and we'll begin the planning and zoning. So we can have a call to order, please.
Mr. Hasse,
Here.
Mr. Seaman, Mr. Coiner,
Here.
Mr. Tarapani, Mr. Stavropoulos,
Here.
Mr. Vesey,
Here.
Ms. McCumber. Here.
Thank you. So number two is approval of minutes from October 15th, 2018. Do I have?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes as submitted.
Second. Thank you. We have a roll call, please.
Ms. McCumber,
Yes.
Mr. Vesey,
Yes.
Mr. Stavropoulos,
Yes.
Mr. Coiner,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Mr. Hasse.
Yes. Thank you. Number three is a quasi-judicial announcement, but we don't need that tonight, so we're going to skip that. So we are on to number four, application number 18119, comprehensive plan amendment to the future land use element, ordinance 2018-27 to relocate and update density and intensity standards for conservation of signified upland habitat and wetland habitat.
Okay, thank you.
Comments, please?
Yes, Pat McNeese, Principal Planner. We have two items this evening. They are related. They're both comprehensive plan text amendments. They're related by virtue of the fact that changes to both elements are needed to be for consistency between the elements. The bulk of the substance of the changes is explained in this first item staff report. Basically, briefly, the city's comprehensive plan was adopted in 1989, and with that plan was adopted a map, which is in the plan as figure 19, which is an adoption of the city's portion of something called the Florida Land Use Cover and Forms Classification System, or FLUX map. The city's environmental standards, or some of those standards, were attached to that map and also adopted in the plan along with that. The map itself has not changed since it was adopted. The purpose of these amendments are to do a couple of things. One is to move those standards that we do have out of the technical portion of the comprehensive plan, or the data and analysis portion, into the policy document or the implementing section of the comprehensive plan. That's where they belong, and that basically provides the implementing mechanism for the city for those standards. The second thing is to just clarify the language and confirm the city's wetlands protection policies that are elsewhere in the plan and in this element as well. And also to provide for ground truthing of the FLUX map and definition of the upland habitat, significant upland habitat that's shown on that map, and to provide for a mechanism to evaluate that habitat and to have qualified professionals make recommendations to the city regarding conservation of that habitat. So that's kind of a real brief summary. Staff recommends approval of this ordinance, and then we can, on the next item, get into the related changes in the other element, which are largely going to be references back to the future land use element.
So it's basically just housekeeping.
Well, it is housekeeping to a certain extent. There are some new policies proposed in this change. The environmental standards have been kept as they were, shifted from the data and analysis technical part of the comp plan to the policy part. We've added definition of significant upland habitat, which is basically taking the habitats that are on the map and listing those and saying, you know, an environmental professional going to a site should identify whether these habitats exist or whether the map needs to be updated or corrected based on ground truthing. We also added the ability for that person or a qualified person to make recommendations on the conservation of that habitat. What are the valuable parts? What should be conserved on site with a site plan via the open space and impervious surface restrictions that are in those existing environmental standards. So the professional would tell you, you know, what they recommend on where the best habitat is, if there is any existing, where open space should be, those types of recommendations to the city.
What do you describe as a habitat?
We have, in the changes, we have 4 habitats listed. Those are on, let's see, those are on page 3 of the ordinance exhibit. And if you look at, this is under policy 1.1.12, that's a new policy that we're adding. The first part of that policy is the shift of the standards from the technical document over to this policy document. So those standards at the top of page 3 exist. They're just being shifted over. The next part describes the habitats. So that would be contiguous areas of 5 acres or larger of high quality scrub and brushlands, pine flatwoods, longleaf pine, xeric oak, or hardwood conifer mixed, as defined by the Flux map. Flux is a classification system that's been in existence for a long time, at least since the 70s in Florida. It's still used. The system is still used. The map in our code is very outdated as far as what it shows, but the habitats are all described in detail in Flux. An environmental professional can take that description and determine whether the habitat exists on site or whether it's something else. It's been cleared, it's planted pines, it's dredge and fill, you know, some other habitat besides these 4 that are listed.
Did everybody find that?
No,
Because I didn't.
I didn't.
I didn't find that. What, can you show me?
Oh,
where
I'm
that might-
sorry.
Page of the first
Okay,
section.
if you look at the ordinance itself
Right?
and then look at Exhibit A, which is attached to the ordinance, that's page 3 of Exhibit A.
So
It's
like-
really the last page of your packet on,
This is it? No? We got 2 different ones.
that's the staff report.
It's on, here, I'll just hand you this page.
Yeah. It's really the last page of this item.
A lot of them are missing.
So this is Exhibit A.
Okay.
This is first page. This is the page she's talking.
All right, thank you.
One in. You said third page, right? Pat?
Of Exhibit A. Yes. Hopefully everybody got a full packet.
Thanks for asking. It did take me a second though, because it doesn't read.
So explain to me again why we're doing this. So we're just trying to connect the dots, so to speak, to all the documentations? So we're actually, to
Yes.
me, it's just a little bit of housekeeping there, correct?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
here it is. So the different.
I have a
You're
question.
recommending that this is something that we should go ahead and approve?
Yes, we are.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Do any of the board members have any questions?
I have a question. On page, I believe page 2. No, forgive me. Page 1 of Exhibit A.
Okay.
Page 1, Exhibit A, under B, Natural Resources, second paragraph, second line. There's a couple of strikes in that sentence.
Mm-hmm.
The second strike is in their entirety after wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
My thought is, what's the purpose and the goal of removing, and I'll read the sentence, it's in the intent, comma, through the implementation policies of the comprehensive plans, comma, to preserve those areas identified as wetlands in their entirety, but that's been struck out. What would be the purpose of removing that particular 3 words?
That is to clarify that the city's policy with respect to wetlands is, as codified in the coastal element, coastal management goals, a no net loss policy. So this is sort of to clarify and remove any perceived ambiguity in the language. We don't require preservation of all wetlands as they exist. We require no net loss of wetlands through appropriate mitigation where, where where the agencies provide for mitigation and the city under our existing policies provide for those standards. So this was kind of to remove any question as far as the city's wetland policy as adopted in the remainder of the comprehensive plan.
If I may
Okay.
go just a step farther, it seems that it's the reverse of that, is that wetlands in their entirety is extremely specific, and that by removing that, we're allowing for interpretation. And the irony is, of course, before we started the meeting, we were discussing the event that's occurring on alternate 19 now, where what was a beautiful wetland doesn't exist anymore. And perhaps this sentence, in some strange, ironic way, is exactly why maybe that should stay in fact, because the no net loss and therefore mitigation, frankly, doesn't work. Just my opinion and thought as to why. This seems like a really critical 3 words in this whole thing that I just read, is that it did say all wetlands, and now it just says, wetlands that we decide, more or less.
Wetlands must be mitigated on a no net loss basis. There are a couple of things that go into that when that's considered. One is the size, one is the quality. The example you just gave, wetland mitigation was required and built to mitigate the impacts to those wetlands. So no net loss, the policy that is elsewhere in your comprehensive plan is being implemented now. What this tries to do is clarify that that is the policy. The city does not prohibit the filling of all wetlands, right? Because all through the plan and through the land development code, frankly, mitigation pursuant to agency requirements is contemplated and written down. So if you can't mitigate something unless you impact it, so that's a given. So this was just to clarify that basically we have a no net loss policy. So in their entirety was perceived, I guess, as applying to wetlands specifically on site. And that is not the way it's carried out in practice or in accordance with the remainder of your comprehensive plan. Does that help?
Well, I have a question. So earlier we were discussing the wetlands that were filled in next to Winn-Dixie that were approved 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So by us okaying this, does it make it easier or harder for that? No change at all.
It doesn't, it doesn't make it easier or harder. This is really to recognize wetland policy that is in practice in the city now. This was adopted back when the comprehensive plan was adopted
In the 70s.
in 1989.
Okay.
So if it doesn't do anything, then we could leave those 3 words in, and it wouldn't change anything. We could leave in their entirety, and everything would continue as it is. It just strikes me as odd, and forgive me for interrupting again, that somehow, someone has picked out these 3 words to cross out. I don't know why. It just strikes me as odd. And I would like to see them left in.
I have a question. Heather, do you see any issues with this?
Hold on,
Sorry,
let
you
me
weren't-
get the mic so I can be recorded. So here's my opinion of this entire issue. Wetland policy in the state of Florida is guided by the state of Florida. Local municipalities can be no more stringent than what the state agency actually approves, and that's in the state statute. That being the case, what is in here is conflicting. That language is conflicting with the policy and procedures that are handled through the state and are handled on almost every case that has been the wetland mitigation that's happened here in the city. So you can do twofold. You know, your comprehensive plan is meant to be a policy document that you aspire to, but it also is an implementation document that you are implementing those policies and procedures that you choose as a community to live by. So you have language in there that conflicts with the remainder of the comp plan as far as the policy language, and it conflicts with your land development code and how that's implemented. So somewhere at some point in time, we need to reconcile these documents. This is the staff's attempt to reconcile these documents in a way that's consistent with the state legislation and the state law and with the policies and practices that are in place today. So that's really why these recommended changes are being put before you is to deal with that ambiguity and to finally come to some kind of resolution so that we can all have a policy, whether we agree or not. It's going to be a compromise. We're never going to satisfy everybody in wetland policy. You know, I look at the wetlands that you're talking about, and I know that those wetlands were degraded. I know that those wetlands had a lot of stormwater from a retention pond being dumped into them on a regular basis. I also know that those wetlands were impacted by the railroad debris that was taken off of the trail originally before the trail was the trail and when it was a railroad. And I also know that that area was impacted historically throughout time because there was a trailer park on it prior to the Winn-Dixie site being on there. So I have a different opinion of the quality of the wetlands that you're talking about in that particular thing. My belief, and the state somewhat agrees with that, is that we need to be able to address wetlands on a larger scale than just on an individual site. And so that is the reason why you see the state allowing for mitigation with a policy of no net loss. The belief is that there's no net loss over the entirety of the watershed is the better way to manage them than to maintain wetlands that may or may not be functional and to still provide for economic benefit through the development of property.
Any other questions?
And Jim, I saw you had your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yeah, but you said that it was it was a trailer park.
That's correct.
Trailer park was way down in the corner of intersection of Mears and alternate 19. It was not in that area that you're describing.
But it was spread across the entire area, and that was partially part of the pond. Well, I can provide you some aerials that show that there was impacts on that property in that area.
Well, as we were talking about these 3 words, so if you strike those out as they are now, the city uses their discretion as to what is and what is not a wetland and sell that property as they see fit. Is that what you're telling me?
The city does not get to define what a wetland is.
I didn't say the city. I said whomever.
You said the city
Well,
uses their discretion.
city as far as your people that you said you brought in, the specialists or the professionals.
So
whomever they are. You didn't identify who those people were.
they would be qualified professionals that are qualified in the
Yeah, but-
field to make those determinations.
What kind of titles do they hold? Where they work for a state agency, do they work for a city agency, or do they a private organization?
Generally, those are private professionals, environmental professionals that hold environmental credentials, that would come in, do studies for those properties, and those studies would then be evaluated by the staff as well as by the state agencies that actually give the permits for the mitigation and for any disruption of wetlands or any impacts of wetlands. So they would be reviewed by the state, by the staff internally here. They're available for public review. The board would be reviewing them when they review the packets because that information is supplied to them as part of the site plan. If we're talking about site plan development or whatever project we're talking about, if it's a master plan, if it's a conditional use, it doesn't really matter what the title of it is. Site a plat. They all get the same type of treatment, where the same type of requirements that they have to meet. They all have to bring the environmental studies in when there's any wetlands impacted. So those documents are reviewed by the staff. They're available for the board to review, and then they're again reviewed by the state agency prior to the permits actually being secured for any type of impact, and then any type of mitigation that's required.
In simplest possible explanation, if somebody comes in with a proposed development that potentially influence wetlands, does this change the process that they would be going through to receive their approvals, or is everything basically the same?
It doesn't change the process. It's still the same processes that we use. It just changes the requirements of where the study information is actually required. Your land development code currently requires the environmental analysis is to be done. This codifies and moves the requirements for the significant upland habitat to the implementation portion of the document, which is your goals, objectives, and policies. And as a result, because with that, we will now require a study to be added into that language, that study mandatorily now needs to come in. There is no discretion of when that study is in. It comes in at the time that the development is coming in for review. So there is really we've been requiring that up to this point. Your previous staff required that prior to this. It just is now cleaner language that actually makes it clearer on what the requirements are to actually implement the wetland, upland preservation policy. So it's actually something that we can implement and it's more tangible.
I think what we're all nervous about is that something slips in that we're changing and we're agreeing to easier development in wetlands area. But from what I hear from you is that it has nothing to do with anything about that. All we're doing is making sure that our language is the same as the state's language. Is that correct?
It's not, so it's not verbatim the language from the state. It is the language that you have in your comprehensive plan that was your particular language. And what we're trying to do is just make it clearer on how that language is going to be applied. But understand, the process doesn't change. This board reviews those applications. The BOC reviews those applications. So the process remains the same. The information that you receive remains the same. So the process by which that someone gets approval of development has not changed, nor will it change. What they can submit to you has not changed. What they're required to submit to you has not changed. We've clarified it.
Any other questions? Okay. Then
Call for public comment.
call for public comment. No public comment? Nope. Chicken. All right then. The discussion for public is closed. Staff or the commission, do we have any internal discussions about this?
I have one concern. We are faced right now with a proposal that was approved 10 years ago. Is there anything that we can do to prohibit or reduce that possibility of happening again?
I don't think that's for us to determine that.
That was my question.
The previous proposal is off the table. There's nothing that you can do to change what has happened in the past with that particular approval.
Well, I understand. I just would like to keep it from happening 10 years from now or 5 years.
Well,
The changes in the city and the changes in the development of the city, it's going to be so drastic in the next 10, 15 years. It seems that we need to protect whatever we can.
I believe that needs to come up to our city commissioners then, correct?
Okay.
So we have
All
to
right.
bring that up to them. We are here solely to approve or not approve the changes that the staff has recommended to us. And I think personally, I'll have to say that I respect the staff and I'll have to go with their recommendation on that. I think that we don't have the power to make those changes, but we, as individuals, have those powers to go up against the commissioners and ask these questions then and say, what is going on with this? I think that's where our role ends and begins.
well, in this particular case, you can put opinions onto the record. They will be included with the information that goes up to the board as soon as Kim and her little fingers type everything out. They'll be in draft form because obviously you guys won't have a meeting before this goes to the BOC. But any opinions that you have that you want to include on the record, those certainly will be made part of the record through the minutes to provide to the commissioners. So if you do have opinions here, you can express them. But you are correct. What the staff is looking for is approval or denial, understanding that your recommendation is that just a recommendation here, just as staff's as a recommendation.
Also, if I call for a vote on this, do I also then include the second?
No.
No? That's something different?
Two separate.
Two separate. Okay, but they're both.
They're
Kind of
related, but
related.
they're
Okay,
not the
all
same.
right, all right. So,
I would like to give a little more board comment,
go ahead, please.
I would like to say thank you to both staff. You did a wonderful job of trying to explain a very arcane topic, so thank you very much. And I did get it. I also got something else within that conversation, because if I may be so polite, is I would disagree as someone that walked by that property daily, if not twice daily. It was a wonderful piece of watershed that held a wonderful amount of bird, roseate spoonbill, fish, turtle, crane. Now, that has nothing to do with you and nothing to do with us, but it's a marker. This is my opinion, is that a travesty occurred there. There's no other way to describe it. They had to save fish, irregardless of what water was going in there. A travesty occurred, and by irony, we're being faced with, sure, it might be an administrative change to make everything line up, but maybe this is a moment where we go, you know what? We're not really excited about how this type of work is being done and being administered within our city. Perhaps, perhaps not. And thus, a vote against is not, don't take it personal, and sure, it's administrative, but perhaps it's a way that we can say that we perhaps need to review how we're approving these projects, so that what little bit of wetland in their entirety is preserved, because I don't know about you folks, but there's not much left, and it's going to get paved over real quick. That's my opinion. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Any more comments? Okay, at this point, I think we'll close the open comment and go to a vote.
You need a motion first.
I need a motion to,
You need a motion first before you can vote. There needs to be a motion on the table before you.
is there a motion on the table to approve this?
It doesn't have to be approved, just,
or to a vote on this?
is there, just call for a motion.
Help me.
You're
Get a
doing really
motion.
good. You really are doing good.
You say we don't need a motion, we just, how do we bring it up?
We need a motion.
We need a
Someone needs to
motion.
move one way or the other.
And what do we call this, app 18-111?
I know what I need.
Yes.
Yes,
is correct.
I'm with you.
Well, I'll make a
So
motion.
I need a motion to,
You just need a motion on application 18-119.
I need,
Somebody move.
I move
What do you move? What is your motion?
that we approve. App,
Okay, so there is a
application
motion
18-119.
to
To
approve
approve
application
application number.
18-119. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a
Thank
second? Chair, you want to call for a roll call?
yes, I'd like to call for roll call, please.
Ms. McCumber,
Yes.
Mr. Vesey,
No.
Mr. Stavropoulos,
No.
Mr. Coiner,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Mr. Hasse.
Yes.
Okay.
Motion.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Thank you. And next on the list is application number 18-120, Comprehensive Plan Amendment to the Coastal Planning and Conservation Element, ordinance 2018-28, to provide for consistency with the future land use element regarding the conservation of significant upland habitat and wetland habitat, and to remove outdated references. When we hear from the staff, please.
Yes, this is a pretty thick text amendment that you have. Most of the changes are the outdated references to things like Chapter 9J5, which is a Florida administrative rule that's been removed, and references to agency names and things like that. The substantive changes, the substance changes that relate to the future land use element are removal of the reference to Figure 19 in some policies in favor of referring to the actual habitats. Figure 19 is being retained in the plan, and it is referred to elsewhere, but in these policies, we are recommending striking the reference to that figure in favor of reference to the future land use policies that we just discussed in the last item. So, good example, the wetlands that you talked about. There are, I would venture to say, at least a few wetlands in the city that are not on that map, probably a lot. When we're talking about wetlands, remember that the state and the federal government have a very, very specific and detailed procedure for delineating wetlands. You were asking about the professionals before. They must follow that procedure, fill out the forms, and show what's jurisdictional. And then a surveyor surveys that line. So the city has no say in what is jurisdictional wetlands. That's defined. So we find jurisdictional wetlands all over the city, even stuff that's not on Figure 19. So that's a good example. And then the uplands are also depicted on there. And in the item we just discussed, those habitats that are on Figure 19 are spelled out. The environmental professional that would be on site would identify whether those habitats are there and evaluate them according to the amendments we just discussed. So these changes are to reference those policies. The main references are in Exhibit A attached to this ordinance 2018-28, mainly on pages A3, A4, A20, and A21. And I gave you that because most of this, as I said, is a lot of outdated references. And staff recommends approval of ordinance 2018-28. Are there any questions?
So again, it's similar. We're just housekeeping, so to speak, to make sure we're all talking the same language on the.
Yes. The changes to the future land use element would necessitate changes to this element to be consistent. Make sure the plan's consistent.
Board have any questions to the staff?
What happened to the figure 19? Did it change or?
No, it's still in the plan
Oh.
and referred to in the data and analysis and discussed there.
Are there any questions? Staff? Say no? All right, we'd open this up to public discussion. Anyone from the public like to discuss any of this? Yeah, I'm looking at you. Okay, then we'll close the public discussion. Any staff or any board members' discussion, if that's what we go to?
Or you can call for a motion.
Or we call for a motion. Do I hear a motion to vote on? Let me find it. Sorry, folks.
And a motion to approve application 18-120.
Thank you. Do I hear a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. We'd like to take roll call, please.
Ms. McCumber,
Yes.
Mr. Vesey,
Yes.
Mr. Stavropoulos,
Yes.
Mr. Coiner,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Mr. Hasse.
Yes. All right, thank you. Motion passes. We're now on to number 6, staff comments.
We have no comments. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
One comment. I'm gonna send out the public hearing schedule for next year. I just want you guys to look at it again. I know we had talked about it earlier in the year, but I just want to make sure everybody gets another copy of it to make sure folks have gotten it, because it's been a while since I've sent that out. So I'll be sending that out probably sometime this week. So just be checking your email for that. Please don't respond to each other. If you want to respond to me, but don't respond to each other. No respond all, okay?
Something with sunshine or?
Yeah. Other than that, that's all that we have.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, and now we move on to number 7, board comments. I have a comment. I'd like to know how we're doing with the 500-foot notification. I'm not letting that go.
And nor should you. If you are passionate about something, you should be passionate about it.
Thank you.
That, the notification requirements will probably come back when we do the land development code update. So we're going to be kicking off that process. Hopefully the very beginning of the year, we'll be going out for RFP. If not before, I was kind of hoping for December, but it's kind of sneaking up on me really fast. So we're hoping that once the RFP has been issued and we get the consultant on board, we'll sit down, figure out what are the best sections, probably come back to this board and say, this is kind of our plan. So you guys can kind of see where we're looking to go. And then you can kind of, work with us and the consultant on, what is priority and what's not. I've got some areas that I would like to talk to you guys about specifically with that ordinance on how I would like to approach it, mostly to deal with some of the issues that we're having. There's some quick fixes, and then there's things that are going to take a little bit longer. So clearly we want to sit and talk about where's the most benefit of using the consultants we have with the funds that we have. So we can do that, and we'll do that just as soon as we get the consultant on board. So that will be coming. I promise that we will address that issue. Certainly we can have a discussion if you'd like at the next meeting. I'm not sure what's on the agenda for December. at this point. I don't remember off the top of my head if we have any applications, but if we don't have any applications, we can certainly provide some draft language so you can kind of see what that language looks like, and you can certainly give us some comments and feedback. Obviously, it won't be amendment. It'll probably just come under staff comments for you guys just to give us some feedback so we can have that available for the consultant. But we can certainly start workshopping some of those sections of code that you guys are concerned about or you want to talk about so that we can have that conversation, so we have that information ahead of when the consultants actually start working on that thing. And since the notice has been one of those issues that's been ongoing off and on for a while, I would recommend that we probably bring that section back to you. But if you guys want to do that, if there's a consensus of the board that you want to do that, I can start pulling some sections if you've got specific sections that you want to look at, so that you can kind of start looking at them. Obviously, if you have a big agenda, I'm not going to bring that, but if you only have an agenda like this where there's only a few things on and you want to stay a little bit and start talking about the language, we'd be glad to do that with you.
So you mentioned consultant. We have to pay someone to help us decide this?
No, we have to pay someone to help us do the formatting and help us do the research for some of the sections. Not so much this particular section, but some of the other sections that are a little bit bigger, heavier lift. Again, we have areas of, Pat and I have areas of expertise, but we are the two planners for the entire city. So trying to write a land development code at the same time that we're processing applications does not make a successful land development code update happen quickly. And so we'd rather have this happen in maybe 18 months versus several years. That's what we're looking at. So we would be looking to, that's why we're looking to have the consultant come help us with that.
The city's only this big on the map.
Yeah, it is only that big on the map, but you'd be surprised at how busy our office is despite that.
No, I understand. But I'm going to ask it every single time.
Yeah, and I'd be glad to bring back the language and kind of work that shop around with you guys and just send that out. Maybe what I'll do is when I send out the email with that, I'll just send the language for that section so you can kind of be thinking about it.
Thank you.
And then we can put that on and start just talking about the language. I mean, you guys can give us your feedback and we can certainly put a draft together, and I'll talk to the city manager if he wants it to go out, if he wants it to go ahead of that the update of the entire land development code, then we'll put it before the board on the land development code before the land development code update. I'm certainly willing to go talk to him about that.
Thanks. Any other board comments?
I think he meant yes on that. Those were a lot of words for, yeah, why don't we make that a priority? We just did all that for admin, and I think this is something of importance. So if there was a way to prioritize that so that it didn't involve necessarily a consultant or heavy lifting, can't we just write something up and get it going at the next meeting?
We certainly can provide the language, get your direction, and then take it to the city manager and see what his direction is, if he wants to wait or whether he would like to proceed forward with it. But yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
So this sounds like it's still going to drag out for another year or so.
The land development code update, yes. The notice requirements don't have to. We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see where that discussion goes with the city manager. I can certainly have that discussion with him.
Thank you. You understand why I'm asking for this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think we're all in agreement to that. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. I do appreciate your help. You guys have been always helpful, and I appreciate it. Thank you. So we're at number 8. Do I hear a
Move that
motion?
we adjourn.
Thank you. We have roll call, please. Do we need one? All say aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Please vote.
That's it.
I'm going to see you
We're done.
Hope everyone has a very happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Spend it with your families.
This was I got to say, this was a little nervous one for all of us, I think. It was, I feel that this was one that could have slipped under. Government slipping it under. You just never.
because that's what I tried.